federally, they're starting to overreach into provincial and territorial approvals.
Industry leaders were called before committee and asked if any of the Liberal bills are causing them a lot of problems. The answers were not good for the Liberal position. Welcome back to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. There's a lot of talk in this country about the natural resources and how the Liberal government is blocking development of those natural resources. And I know that the big one that everybody talks about is oil and pipelines, but there's also mining that is getting overlooked. And some of the mining experts were brought before committee to be asked about if the same bills are causing causing them any trouble at all. Now, before we get into it, I'm going to do some shout outs. Okay, these are in no particular order. Yuri Lubinest 5159 gave $6.99, said thanks. I say thank you right back. I appreciate that. At Schwangster gave $20.99. Very generous. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, brother. That's what his comment was. I appreciate you listening. John McMillan 6886 gave $6.99 and said thanks. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Prish-P8C gave $6.99 and said thanks. I say thank you right back. Steve McGarrett 113 gave $20 and said thank you, Sterling. I say thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate that. Hydro Dude 101 $6.99, but thanks. I thank you very much, Hydro Dude. I appreciate you listening. Appreciate the support. Rostoffer 13 $4.99 said thanks. Thank you very much. He's a continued supporter. McAvee, another longtime supporter, 9015 gave $13.99, said thanks. I value your reporting. I thank you very much for listening. At Ruth H9B, another longtime supporter, gave $50, very generous. She said the Congress of Foreign Relations and the WAF are demon twins. And I don't know much about them, though I did a report on them because they had Carney on there. And from what I saw, I can see how they have similar ideologies, that's for sure, those two organizations. However, thank you very much, Ruth. I appreciate all of your support. Scott Neerim, 8844, gave $99.99. I thank you very much for your generous support. Mary Lou Cleveland, 6991, both longtime and frequent supporter, gave $13.99 and said thanks. I thank you very much. Not only did she do it one time, she did it a second time, and then she did it a third time. So I appreciate all of that support. And finally, Jeremy Forbes 237 gave $2.79 and said thanks. And I say thank you very much. I would take this opportunity to encourage all of you to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. All right, let's check it out.
So we face at our stage of exploration a number of delays. That's largely related to permits for our drilling operations, establishing remote infrastructure, so airstrips and such. And those tend to take, at the moment, years in order to work through the system, through the SAB system in the Yukon. So it can take us a couple of years to get through a permit to drill or build an airstrip and such. So it's very time-consuming as compared to other jurisdictions.
Understand this is a miner, like a person who does mining. And so when he says drill, I don't want you to think that he's drilling for oil wells. He's drilling for core samples. What they do is they look for a couple of tells, that's up here on the topography. They look at some certain things that they know about geologically. Then they take a little bit of surface samples and they take that back and they look for certain levels. And then they're like, okay, well, this could be an area where we'll find diamonds or gold or, whatever the mineral that he happens to be looking for. Let's drill down and find out if maybe we're onto something. And so they'll drill down, take a core sample. I mean, it's not a very big thing. And then they will, from those core samples, understand if they are close or if they are not. And this is the steps that they need to make development. Many of you might be thinking, yeah, well, why don't they just land the plane on the water? Because they don't need a permit for an airstrip if they put up a floating plane. But they need an airstrip to bring in the equipment to do the drilling. They need the airstrip to bring in the trucks. They need the airstrip to bring in the office setup. They need the airstrip to bring in a lot of... So they're looking to land a cargo plane or 5. I don't know why it would take years to approve that. I don't know that the federal government is considering about the amount of investment a diamond mine goes through. So I think, though, it does kind of prove the point that the Liberal government's in the way.
And a quick timeline on Ekati, our first drill hole into Kimberlite was late in 91. We started permitting in 94. Our last permits were available in 96, and we went into production in 98.
So that's a diamond mine in the Yukon, and they did their sample cores, like I just told you about, in 91. It took them 3 years to decide that they were going to be drilling creating a mine, and then 4 years to get the permission to put shovels in the ground.
And that was a tier one world-class mine. I can't permit, drill holes as fast as it took to permit that entire mine in the NWT.
NWT, Northwest Territories. So now he's saying that he can't even get, in 8 years, he can't get permission to go after core samples. That's absurd. That's just absurd. That's the kind of problems that you have when you deal with fanatics, right? With these, there's no middle ground. There's no, let's make a compromise. It's all about do it now, and they lose their minds because this guy wants to take a core sample, which we do all the time for various reasons. I mean, we're drilling in the Arctic for core samples all the time when it comes to the weather. So I find this to be a little bit hypocritical that they can drill down into the glaciers to find out stuff, but this individual can't drill down to discover whether or not there's a massive mine there and all of the money and all of the jobs that comes along with that and all of the infrastructure, the roads they would build. They would build the roads, right? We would need the government to do it.
Federally, they're starting to overreach into provincial and territorial approvals and expanding the requirements for approvals for those permits has demonstrated, unfortunately, that time frame is expanding rather than being reduced at the moment. I wish that every project that had commercial viability across the country was fast-tracked rather than a select few.
Now, why is it that the federal government feels that they can tell the Northwest Territories how they can develop their own resources? They don't have that right. That's overreach. That's the overreach that he's talking about. Every region has control of their own resources. Nunavut just received control of their resources early last year, or let's call it maybe in the middle of the year last year. So they have the right to develop them all they want, but all of a sudden the federal government is trying to stop this guy doing drilling for a mine that he may or may not put in his company in the Northwest Territories rather than get the permission of the Northwest Territories. The federal government is overstepping their overreach. You heard him, his word. This is an industry expert. This is the people that know what we're talking about here.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I mean, on the federal lands, there's a 28-day period that the present government there has deemed is the turnaround time for permits. It would be wonderful if we had something similar in Canada, but we don't. But yeah, on the whole, they're several years faster to permitting in the States than in Canada. And for the multinational countries around the world that are looking to invest, when you've got two projects that have, fairly similar attributes, the time it takes to production makes a significant difference, and those dollars will flow to other countries before they come to Canada. And that, unfortunately, is the situation at the moment that, we are losing global investment as a result of how long it takes to put our resources into production.
He was talking about Trump saying if it's on a federal land and you want to do a mine or you want to do something, we're going to give you approval, or we'll tell you approval or disapproval within a month, 28 days. Very reasonable. With all the technology that we have nowadays, there should be no problem doing that. I believe that we need to consider that the Liberal government is slowing everything down, and as a result, the people that are building mines, the people that want these resources, and don't think for 1 minute that if you're, an international conglomerate of a mining company that you all of a sudden have to pick just certain mines. You have the money, you have the infrastructure, you have the know-how. You will apply that to any product that you can get your hands on, and you will then take some money and throw it into drilling, or you'll throw it into logging. I mean, there's a lot of industry that revolves around a mine. And yes, mines, they look kind of rough afterwards, but there's plenty of examples of how the mine looks when the job is done. Of course, what I will always tell you is the same thing. We have to make sure that we keep the water clean and the land clean. Now, mining has a lot of tailings ponds, obviously, but there's a lot of technology in cleaning those tailings ponds up, which of course takes a number of years. So that's a good job for a number of years. That's a tradesman, that's a technician, that's a decent job for a number of years for a few people. I don't know how many people go into it. Let's just call it a dozen. And that's the kind of infrastructure job, that's the kind of long-term job that many people in Canada would be happy with. We know from experience that we can make this water drinkable. Again, we know that and by drinkable, I mean good enough for fish. And so really what we have to be asking ourselves is, why is the government not only getting in the way of the development, the federal government, mind you, getting in the way of the development of the natural resource, which will bring a lot of jobs to the region, but they're also getting in the way of the jobs that will clean up afterward. All because of this altar of environmentalism, where they want to worship at the altar, and they want everybody else to worship at the altar or else. I mean, that's what it looks like to me. I hear a lot of people talking about how it seems like a cult, seems like a religion, and I kind of have to agree. The fact that you won't listen to anything other than your own ideology reminds me so much of all of the people in the world who have zero tolerance for various religious things. I mean, I could give you 100 examples or 20 examples of the world that we're living in right now, whether that be a woman's right to choose, or whether that be a woman's right to uncover her hair. I mean, there's 100 examples of where the ideology will not listen to anybody else's ideas. And this seems to be the same situation with the environmentalists, who are now obviously interfering with some of the largest corporations on the planet, developing the resources, bringing in billions of dollars, and creating long-lasting generational jobs.
I mean, we have supplies of, you pick it from uranium to natural gas to oil to gold. I mean, we have everything set up. The only thing that's stopping us is ourselves. I mean, we have the need. There are 7 billion people on the planet that don't have the same access to energy that we do in North America. We have an obligation, a moral obligation, I think, to help them move to use the products that we have in this country. And let's not forget, we produce oil and gas, amongst other things, amongst the cleanest of any nations. So if we don't do it, the only people that are going to be able to do it will be the Russians and the Iranians and others that, frankly, I'm not sure Canadians would like to see those 7 billion people served by those players as opposed to ourselves. And even the United States as well, right? This is a competitive world. We have the products. We know the demand is there. We should take advantage of that and serve Canadians while also serving other parts of the world.
So do you think that Canada and the federal government's regulations that are in place are standing in the way of that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think there's any doubt about it.
That's the CEO of Enbridge saying to CTV that he does not believe there's any doubt about the fact that who is in the way of all of this resource development but the Mark Carney government, the Liberal government and their fanaticism, the Liberal government and their backward ideology, where they feel that the rest of the world should be able to pull out oil as dirty as they want while you and I can't have a car. This backwards ideology where they think that they can have all of the luxuries that are driven by fossil fuels while you and I must, develop how to figure out how to rollerblade in the wintertime. How we don't even allowed to have a good solid heat for our barns for the animals to keep them from freezing. How we have to have our food taxed because they might have put out a little bit of carbon in the manufacture of some mushrooms or any of 100 other kinds of foods, because their lack of flexibility, because of their complete lack of compromise. And of course, it's a compromise that the right side of the aisle is offering. They're offering carbon capture. They don't need it. Many of us that understand how carbon works see that there's a lot of benefits happening around the planet because of this carbon. But they need to terrify you, and carbon's their latest one. It started with acid rain, and now it's carbon. Now I won't get it too far into that. But let's just listen to one other person's input, right? Because we hear all the time. We always hear this is the new far left new cry, right? It's got to be all about the First Nations and how the First Nations are against the development of resources. For some reason, they want the world to believe that First Nations enjoy poverty.
It's a project you and the National Coalition of Chiefs are backing. Can you tell us why you think this is a good project?
Well, our organization was actually conceived from the Northern Gateway Project.
So this is asking the First Nations CEO of the National Coalition of Chiefs about Danielle Smith's proposal for the $14 million investment in another pipeline.
The first board that we had were board members that were part of the 31 out of 40 communities along the right-of-way that started the Aboriginal Equity Partners on Northern Gateway. And they were First Nation and Métis communities that agreed to become owners of the project. So we've been trying to ramp up Northern Gateway 2.0 for quite some time now. I think the province will be surprised at the amount of support that they'll get along the right of way. You got to remember the communities that filed actions against them that are opposed to the project are not along the right of way.
Not along the right of way. So, I mean, he said so many things there. First, he said that the Liberal government, knowing that over 75% of the First Nations along the right of way support this project, then the people that filed actions against the government, whether they be in British Columbia or otherwise, are not part of the right of way. So some group down in Vancouver is complaining, and the people that are along the right of way, which is of course where the pipeline will flow, which is of course the people who are going to get the benefits of the jobs and of the investment, they're being overruled by a small group of special interests because they say the things that the government wants to say or wants to hear, excuse me. I don't know. It's not looking very above board from where I'm sitting.
And the 31 out of the 40 communities that signed on are on the right of way and have always wanted to move forward with this project because they were scheduled to get $2 billion in benefits over 30 years, including 1/3 ownership in the pipeline. So not only did they get shareholder returns on owning the pipeline, but they'd have seats on the board to be able to manage and monitor the pipeline and make sure that all the integrity, safety systems, and environmental protection plans are properly maintained.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what the Liberal government is talking about then, because this is a 1/3 ownership for the people along the right of way and a $2 billion outright investment in all of their communities. That kind of money for that region, like that those remote areas, that's life changing. That's generational alteration. That's doctors and schools and infrastructure internalized. That's a little bit of investment in this business, a little bit of investment in that business, and before you know it, 5 years down the road, all of a sudden they're self-sustaining. Why would the government interfere with that?
Well, I think that there's a lot of talk about getting rid of, the tanker ban to, because in a sense it's rather hypocritical because there are some 250 ships sailing across the coast of Haida coming from Alaska, Asia, going to Alaska, going to Asia. And a lot of these ships are already loaded with oil and gas. So it doesn't make any sense that you would, cripple only the Canadian tankers while all of these other tankers are going by the coast. We are, as a group, fighting, as you know, to defeat unreserved poverties. We think that as many as 60% of our people are in the lower class level of income, and we want to get them out, get them employed, and take advantage of the prosperity that exists in our natural resources.
A couple of things occurred to me while I was listening to the CEO of the Coalition of Chiefs, and collectively they've made me kind of cranky. 31 out of 40 of the communities along the right-of-way agreed to have this. And I'm sure if we took a closer look nowadays, we would see that number has creeped up higher because poverty has only increased. Meaning that the Liberal government foresaw a possibility for the pipeline to be renewed because so many of the people along the right-of-way were encouraged and enthusiastic and willing to, invest money into it, or at least drive people to work along it and all the rest of that, which of course would bring a lot of economic sovereignty to the region. So the Liberal government told themselves that they have to get out in front of that, and then they decided to put a tanker ban. Rather than worry about the pipeline getting there, they simply worried about whether or not they would have somebody waiting for it in the water to take it to all of these markets. India, Japan, South Korea, China, so many markets, collectively ready to take every last drop that we can get there. Meanwhile, we got ships coming into Vancouver that are easily the size of tankers. Now, oil tankers come in 3 sizes. Of those 3 sizes, a coal barge is the same size as the smallest one, and a cargo ship is the same size as the largest one. So these ships are coming through all the time. I mean, the amount of freight that comes into Vancouver or goes along the Alaskan coast down into California, these are massive ships. So why all of a sudden is it only the ones that's carrying the oil? Why all of a sudden is it only the ones that's carrying the LNG? Well, because the Liberal government doesn't care about the prosperity of that region. The Liberal government doesn't care about the prosperity of any of it. They have $100,000, $200,000 jobs. They don't understand what poverty is. Many of them have investments in other pipelines in other parts of the world. So they have vested interest in keeping the exclusivity of this project, of this product. They've invested a lot of money with influencers and various scientists and various First Nations to get them to come out against it. And yet none of them are actually part of the region that would be immediately impacted. We see that 75%, right, 31 out of 40, and I'm sure that we can get that number up to 35, are happy to accept the money. We hear that this First Nations chief estimates that the people along that route, 60% of them live in the low economics. So that's poverty. Now, if you can appreciate how difficult it is for a person who has access to the urban living with the food banks and the buses and everything to live in poverty in a major city, imagine how difficult poverty is in a rural area where they don't have access to the cars or the gas or any of a number of a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen, 100 things I could list off that make living in a city poor, though living poor is difficult no matter where you do it. But you can eke out an existence more aptly in the city than you can out in the middle of nowhere. I'm sure you might be able to hunt for your food, I get it, or trap for your food and all the rest of that. But if you think for 1 second that they're living the high life because they're off the main beaten path, then you are absolutely 100% misunderstanding the words that are coming out of my mouth. And I tell you that it is much more difficult. And I further tell you that 60% of those people living in abject poverty or in the lowest, the low income is the word that he put it. If you want me to believe that they wouldn't happily accept more money, if they wouldn't happily accept a job that gets them out of that poverty, if you want me to believe that there aren't mothers in that area who would love to have a job to go to so that they could feed their children excellent meals instead of just scraping by, well, I'm just simply not going to believe that. I believe that as a person who's been in these areas, as a person who has seen what rural poverty looks like, I can assure you that there are every single solitary one of those 60% that will gladly go out of their way to have the decent job that would, because even a little bit of money will make an enormous impact. Of course, along with this infrastructure of the pipeline comes roads and comes magnetic levitation, which will bring freight, inexpensive groceries, fresh food, or the ability to teach them to manufacture greenhouses, which will supply them with regional food. Now, when I say greenhouses and regional food, the centralists of the liberalist government, they can't handle those words. They want everything to be done through one company. They don't want you to have the independence of growing your own food or growing food only for the 40 communities along your roadway. They want you to be going to one of the major monopoly grocery stores. They want you to know exactly where you're going. So what we are looking at here is an ideological divide. It's not about the environment. It's about the control of the people. If it was about the environment, we would understand that they're cleaning it up. We would understand that they're giving a third of the board seats to the First Nations themselves, the people that the Liberals always say are the ones that are upset about the impact on the environment. But I have been on reservations, and I have seen what poverty in those communities looks like. And I promise you, there's not a one of them that wouldn't say to themselves, I wish I had a decent job. And no matter which way you look at it, the Liberal government is impacting that. Not just 1 or 2 people. This is a major amount of communities that are being impacted negatively, not only by the emissions cap, but also by the tanker ban. And you can't say when you listen to the Enbridge CEO or when you listen to the mining CEO that this legislation is not harming the development of this nation, that this legislation is not, in fact, in the way of not only the development and the ethical resources going to Asia, going to different parts of the world, but further that it is blocking the ethical economic development of Canada itself. That the federal government is once again getting in the way of the economic prosperity of the First Nations bands along the way, not just in British Columbia or in Alberta, but all of the ones that are being shut down, all of the ones that are being put on the back burner all over the northern part of Canada. And whether they be First Nations of the southern part of the continent or the northern part of the continent, who, if you're not aware, see themselves distinctly different, or whether they be of the Métis, or whether they just be of everyday ordinary people living in the city. Why do we permit the government to tell us that poverty is the only way that we can stop the emissions that they are so terrified of? Why do we permit the government to tell us that if the Americans are not going to sell us cars, we're not going to import their ideology, but we're going to go into China and we're going to try to import that ideology? Where nobody, there's no capitalism, and one is capitalist and one isn't. That's the example I'm using there. Why do we allow this centralist ideologues of the liberal government, why do we allow them to try to utilize an excuse to keep people in abject poverty? 60% of your population is in poverty. You see it everywhere you turn. It's not a community. It's not a neighborhood. It's from border to border. I just believe that we need to hear the words that the conservatives are saying right now. Get out of the way. Because there's no excuse for us to say that we're trying to help people in poor countries. That's why we're allowing them to come in massive numbers. While the poor in our own country, we don't help at all. There's nowhere along the liberal argument that is cohesive, and therefore it is reactive. It means it's saying one thing to one person and one thing to another person because really they're after something that neither of us are worried about, that we're not talking about. They're after a third thing. And I dare say that third thing is control. But that's just my opinion. I would encourage you to leave your opinion down in the comments. I'm going to wrap here. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.